Good morning. We are standing here in the Clinton, Texas cemetery. The edge of the old and the edge of the new together right here. Clinton was a significant town back in the 1860s and 1870s. It was the county seat for a number of years of DeWitt County. Prior to it becoming the county seat was Cameron, the first county seat, which wasn't far from here, on land donated by Joe Tumlinson. 1850 came along and citizens decided Clinton would be the better county seat, which it was, and it became rather large town, you might say. There were churches, saloons, of course, a blacksmith shop, and if there were, in a perfect world, and we had a solid map, we could probably pinpoint where each church or grocery store or saloon or livery stable was. About 1850, Clinton became the county seat. And for all practical purposes, Clinton became the center of the Sutton-Taylor Feud. A feud which raged for, depending on how you count the victims and the court records and everything, could be 30-year feud, ending in the 90s. But we're going to talk about what happened in Clinton in 1874, and it involves John Wesley Hardin, Jim Taylor, the cattle industry, which was prime in that time. But think that in 1874, May of 1874, John Wesley Hardin, his friend, he's not a cousin, a friend, go to Comanche, Texas, northwest of here. And on the 21st of May, 1874, it is Hardin's birthday, 21. And of course there's drinking involved and gambling and carousing, and outwardly all is going well, but Charles M. Webb, the deputy sheriff of Brown County, decides to come to Comanche. We don't know for sure why. Some say it might have been, well, he had a girlfriend here and he came to see her. More likely, he knew Jim Taylor and John Wesley Hardin were here, and both of them had a reward on their head. John Wesley Hardin, of course, reward because he had killed a number of people. Jim Taylor especially had a large reward because he had killed Bill Sutton, the only Sutton involved in the Sutton-Taylor Feud. But Sutton had a lot of friends and followers. But back to Comanche in May 21, 1874, Webb decides to arrest either Jim Taylor or John Wesley Hardin. Nobody knows for sure. He made a fatal mistake because he didn't have any backup. He wanted to arrest one of them, and that would be that. But Hardin, Taylor fired back. Hardin was wounded. Webb was killed. Now there were Hardins living in Comanche. His brother Joe lived there. His parents lived there. But they didn't have a good reputation. And because of that, plus Hardin killing an outsider, a number of citizens formed into mobs. They're going to take the law into their own hands. And what happens is, members of the Hardin family, including Brother Joe, cousins Bud and Tom Dixon, are arrested. What happens next is Joe and the Dixon brothers are taken out of whatever holding the people had for a jail, were taken out and lynched, left hanging. Shortly after that, two other cousins, Alex Barrickman and Hamilton Anderson, were shot to death by Comanche citizens with some Texas Rangers. By now, Captain John R. Waller has entered the scene. So we have citizens, Rangers in the picture. Hardin and Taylor managed to escape from Comanche. At the same time, or concurrently, I mentioned the cattle industry. Hardin and Taylor, and maybe the Clements brothers as well, had gathered herds of cattle to take up to sale in Kansas, whether it was Dodge City or Ellsworth or Newton, we're not sure, because that kind of lost in the picture. The herds of cattle were at this point held in Hamilton County, the county adjacent. And the mobs, or citizens of Comanche and Brown County, want further revenge. They arrest the hands, or the cowboys, of Hardin and Taylor in Hamilton County, and they will be taken to Clinton, county seat of DeWitt. John R. Waller will escort the prisoners to Clinton for trial, presumably for cattle theft. There were 7 different hands that were arrested, but 4 concern us here. The 4 are James Monroe Bacchius, nicknamed Doc because he had some medical knowledge, Jim White, Cute Tuggle, or Alfred Cute Tuggle, and Rufus P. Scrap Taylor. Those 4 not only arrested, but no apparent charges are brought against them, are the night of June 21, 22, taken from the Clinton jail and lynched, either in Clinton or in the cemetery, because supposedly they had done the lynching close to the cemetery for the convenience of the families. Of those 4, we know Scrap Taylor is taken over to what is now the Taylor Bennett Cemetery across the river and buried there with a marker. Jim White and Alfred Tuggle are probably buried in this old section of the Clinton Cemetery. You'll see behind me a historical marker listing the names of people who are presumably buried here. And the name of Jim White and Coot Tuggle are listed. And you will also notice Jim Cox, his name is listed. And of course, you may know Jim Cox was a victim of a group of people led by John Wesley Hardin, part of the Sutton-Taylor Feud. The three presumably were taken down, and two of them are buried here. Scrap Taylor taken over there by citizens or family members and buried alongside his uncle and other members of the family. But his uncle, Pitkin Taylor, who later we'll see his grave. It's a sad story when you consider the number of victims that fell. Joe Harden, the two Dixon boys, Alf Barrickman, Hamilton Anderson, Scrap Taylor, Coot Tuggle, Jim White, 8 people who were members of the Taylor family or clan, or merely happened to be there with them, were killed, lynched, shot in anger because of Harden killing Charlie Webb. And it's one of those tragic things that happens probably every day in one way or another and somewhere or another. But we will now go to the Taylor Bennett Cemetery and follow up on these. Thank you for listening. Good morning again. We are here now in the Taylor Bennett Cemetery, a few miles south of Cuero. There are 31 Bennetts buried here, and there are 19 Taylors. Pardon me, 14 Bennetts, 8 Taylors, and there are 9 others. Standing to my left is you might say the clan leader outside of Creed Taylor. We have here the grave of Pitkin Barnes Taylor, the father of Jim Taylor and the uncle of several other Taylors who figure in the feud. This marker is Pitkin, and his wife Susan Day is listed on it as well. Now, there are marked graves, and we can presume or believe there are a number of family members who do not have a marker. For example, Will and Henry Kelly, 2 young men who were married into the Taylor family, who were killed in 1870. Part of the feud, partly they were killed by a posse headed by William Sutton and Jack Helm. So we have, as early as 1870, we have Sutton and Taylor family members against each other. The reason that Will and Henry Kelly were killed is uncertain, because at the same time they were arrested, their other 2 brothers were also arrested. Will and Henry Kelly are probably buried here. There are a few Kellys, but Will and Henry have no marker. The other 2 brothers who were arrested at the same time stood trial in Hallettsville, were found not guilty. So we're left with the question, why did Will and Henry get killed? We'll never know the answer for sure, but they probably are buried here. The problem with the Pitkin Taylor and his killing is that he tried to get Sutton and the other members of the posse charged with murder. He wanted to take them to trial and probably hope for the worst. But they stood trial and were found not guilty, so Pitkin was left with dissatisfaction. because of Pitkin Taylor's efforts to get Sutton and his men tried and the hassle of trial, they decided to kill him. So in either late 1872 or early 1873, Pitkin was lured out of his home because somebody rang the ox bell, disturbing the Pitkin-Taylor household, causing Pitkin to come out and investigate, and that's when he was shot. The headstone says he died in March 1873. So we have the assumption, shot late 72 or early 73. But that is Pitkin Taylor's end, and his son's grave is to my right here. Now, during the feud, if you were a follower of Will Sutton or his friends, associates, then that meant you were against or for. It was difficult to be a neutral. That is typical of so many Texas feuds. Now I speak of Jim Taylor here, who, if you can possibly read his headstone, first thing you notice, he has crossed rifles at the top, which is very unusual marking for a headstone. Usually you'll see a hand pointing towards heaven, or an open book, or a closed book, but here we have a target and crossed rifles. And we learn Taylor was born in 1851, and the stonecutter erred because he was killed in December 1874 and buried in early 1875. Another interesting thing about this headstone, the reason Jim Taylor was killed, there are several possible versions. As far as we know, Jim Taylor had one charge against him. He managed to catch up with Bill Sutton and killed Sutton at Indianola, March 1874. Jim Taylor had his cousin, Bill Taylor, with him. Naturally, the state and Mrs. Sutton placed a reward on Taylor's head. Now, what put them here? They had a reward on their head. Jim Taylor and some associates or friends, Mace Arnold and A.R. Hendricks, two others who are buried adjacent to Jim Taylor's stone. They were in Clinton, the end of December 1874. Now, why were they in Clinton is the question. Some say that Jim wanted to meet with attorney Theodore Teal, who was a very successful attorney. Probably would have got him off on self-defense. Another theory is that Taylor and his friends intended to burn the courthouse down because that would destroy any indictments against them. And a third, he wanted to meet with Richard B. Hudson, a deputy sheriff, and advise Hudson to get out of the county, that the county wasn't big enough for both of them. Well, that was a mistake. Hudson gathered some friends, former friends of Sutton, and with that posse attacked Jim Taylor and his friends. After a few minutes of gunfire, Jim Taylor was killed. Mason Winchester Smith Arnold was killed. A.R. Hendricks was killed. They were blasted to death. They are buried here. And for many years, Hendricks and Arnold, their grave were marked by a wooden cross with their names on it. A few years ago, friends of history and Taylor's Sutton-Taylor Feud managed to get these replacement granite stones. And here they are, A.R. Hendricks, Mason Arnold, Jim Taylor, three who died in the feud. Probably no charges were really leveled against them, but they were part of a mix-up between families and possibly some cattle stealing, possibly other things. You can speculate all day, but Jim Taylor apparently had let the public know that since Bill Sutton killed his father, he wanted the opportunity to be the first to kill Bill Sutton. At the funeral of Pitkin, Jim Taylor is credited with saying to his mother, "I will wash my hands in Bill Sutton's blood." And March 11, 1874, Jim Taylor, Bill Taylor, caught up with Bill Sutton as Bill Sutton was intending to leave Texas and maybe go Kansas or elsewhere. Indianola, Matagorda Bay. One could hear the screams of Mrs. Sutton as Jim and Bill killed her husband and their friend, Gabe Slaughter. I thank you for listening.